Welcome to another episode of Trip Tick Tock, where we have a trio of guests, a current student, an alum, and a faculty member discuss their different perspectives on a chosen theory topic for 15 minutes or less. This week's theme is the new normal. So we'll be asking all three guests the same questions in hopes of getting some different answers. We like to see how their viewpoints evolve as they hone their craft and get a little insight into what they think the new norm will be in the theater world. I have here with me Elisabeth Warren. She's a junior environmental science and theater arts double major at Dickinson College. She's also an active member of the Myriad Players Theater Society, both on campus and off. We also have Robert Hupp, a proud Myriad player, class of '81. Bob is currently the artistic director of Syracuse Stage in Central New York. Previously, he spent several years as the producing artistic director of the Arkansas Repertory Theater, and before that, the artistic director of New York City's Jean Cocteau Repertory. In addition, Bob enjoyed 8 years on the Dickinson College faculty. And last but not least, we have Professor Todd Wronski. He's a professor of theater at Dickinson College. His professional acting credits include roles with the Dallas Theater Center and Guthrie Theater, and he has produced plays in England, Scotland, Italy, and Germany. So let's start with this question, a short one. How did your theater journey begin, and how did it lead you to Dickinson? So we'll start with you, Todd, and then we'll jump to Elisabeth and then Bob. So feel free to jump in once the one before you has finished speaking.
When I was in 8th grade, I went down to our high school gym/auditorium and saw my older brother in a production of Our Town. And I still, to this day, remember walking home from that and just not in so many words, but where it counted, that's what I wanted to do. And I've been blessed to be able to do it really almost ever since. And I then, many years later, I find myself on the faculty of the State University of New York at Binghamton. Karen and I had our first child, Carl. And looking back on it, I think I said to myself, I don't know that I would encourage my new sons to go to school in this environment. Not because it was poor, it was an excellent school, but because philosophically, our majors were racking up 2/3 to 3/4 of their 4-year major in one discipline. And they were great people, and they're very ambitious, and I just love them to death. But the education that they were getting was something that basically I discovered I was not as in tune with as I may have thought. And so I looked for places, and here I am. Couldn't be more happy. Very fortuitous at Dickinson.
My theater experience has been a little shorter than my fellow podcasters today, but started with my mom introducing me to film adaptations of various Roger and Hammerstein pieces, as well as My Fair Lady, The Music Man, just falling in love with theater in that sense, and occasionally going to see live theater at local stages in my area. I live close to DC, so we had the Arena Stage and the Olney Theater Center, which is kind of where we would go most often. And my first experience, other than my dance career, which has been ongoing for almost 20 years now, was middle school theater, which is very basic, but a beginning nonetheless, and moving into high school theater. And I knew that I wanted to keep that as part of my life, even though my main focus at school is environmental science and forestry. The art always helps balance it out, and it's always a creative outlet to go to. So I don't know where it will go afterwards, but we'll see.
I grew up in a town in Delaware. And so when I came to Dickinson, I didn't have a lot of experience in theater. I had done some high school theater, but it was really at Dickinson. And the theater professor that really changed my life was a man named Dave Brubaker. So I really learned a lot about theater at Dickinson when I came as an undergrad. But even when I was at Dickinson, I don't think I ever intended to go into theater. I figured I'd go to law school. And my major, I had a theater major, but I also had an American Studies major. And so it wasn't until I got out of Dickinson, moved to New York, and went to acting school, and really started getting immersed in the culture of theater in New York City, that ultimately I decided, well, maybe I wasn't ever going to go to law school. But it was really at Dickinson, when I got to Dickinson, that I really discovered my love for theater and for dramatic literature.
All right, very cool, very diverse theater backgrounds. Very interesting. So now let's get into the meat of the topic. So how has theater, in your personal experience, been coping with the pandemic, and what do you see as the new normal for theater going forward? We'll start with Elisabeth, and then on to Bob, and then Todd.
To pull out my notes here because I've been thinking all day about it. Well, first of all, theater has definitely survived the pandemic, and we're talking about the new normal and how theater kind of exists. And before the show, we mentioned, like, I don't know if it's theater or not, because it's kind of leaning more towards the film aspect. But sorry, I think that we're definitely seeing right now an increase of like the online presence, whether that's Zoom theater or other type of software that we're using, as well as an increase in one-man plays. Like I saw a rendition of A Christmas Story, and it was all done with a singular actor, but that made it COVID safe, and it worked really well. Although in the future, I definitely see a mix on terms of the audience side of increased virtual and in-person audiences, which I know if you think about the way that theater may be spread, there's a lot of places where like regional theater, for instance, or national theater doesn't exist because there's not a large city with a big stage. So we may see more of an increase in the accessibility of theater as a whole.
You know, I think a big reset here. About 95% of the field is currently unemployed. And we've been shut down. March 13th was pretty much when every theater in the country shut down. Our commercial houses in New York closed, and everything has been an exploration since that time. You know, when we see a reset, when we see theaters slowly reopen, and we still don't know when that's going to be. My theater in Syracuse is hopeful that we can be back to some form of live performance by October or November. That may be ambitious, still too soon to tell in New York State. But one of the things that we really have to talk about, have to really engage, is the We See You White American Theater document that came out that our BIPOC theater colleagues published last June. And our field nationally has really been coming to the idea of a reckoning. How will our new theater be more just, be more equitable to theater artists of all backgrounds and theater audiences of all backgrounds? And since we've taken this time for reset, this time for pause, and many theaters have been working in hybrid ways, like Syracuse Stage has, but when we're back to live performance, and we're back to whatever this new normal is, we have to really look at how we as an organization, as community engaged organizations, really come to terms to be more equitable and more just for all artists and for audiences moving forward. That's the key question that theaters are wrestling with during this pandemic.
I think going forward too, that this technology has and this moment that we're going through has pushed things forward, pushed change that was imminent or started. It's accelerated, and again, we see White American Theater as a good example of change that was already starting to happen. But this has kind of supercharged both the impulse toward change and vehicles by which that change can be realized. One being technology. When I look at how we go back to things too, I can't help but be, you know, what you see depends on where you stand. And from my experience, like at the Guthrie Theater, growing up there and then later acting with that, it truly wanted to be a regional resource and truly wanted to spread, as it were, the gospel of then a fairly traditional form of theater, but widespread through the entire upper Midwest. You know, it's up there by itself all the way down to Chicago. In a similar way, Dallas Theater Center was in the center of a very big geographic area. And they really aspired to be, yes, a live repertory theater in a city. But just as technology, in terms of touring technology, has allowed more and more New York productions to tour more extensively and for greater lengths of time, in a traditional tour sense, and has allowed theaters, regional theaters, to tour their productions and have co-productions and that sort of thing. Well, the technology that has been developed in a very short time during the pandemic has the potential then to spread that theater, perhaps for in a theater like Bob's or a theater like the Guthrie, to even more regionalize it and even more democratize it and even more to make it an art form not only of the city dweller, but of perhaps the people in the smaller towns of America.
So kind of going off of that, are there any particular benefits or new opportunities that you were talking about to this new theater world that really excite you? Maybe moving more into film or more into audio, or just kind of a new frontier? Is there a specific thing that you'd be excited to try out? We'll start with Bob and then move to Todd and then Elisabeth.
Well, Elisabeth made the point about how, and Todd was referencing this too, about how our work can be more accessible. And so even when we're back to live performance, I think we'll continue to maintain an online presence because folks who have never been able to experience the work can experience the work. Of course, the flip side of that is you've got the National Theater, you've got theaters all over the world releasing content on platforms like Netflix and Amazon, and that content for the viewer is free. So we have to wrestle with how do nonprofit theaters who don't have that kind of accessibility and those kind of details create work moving forward. But I think, I'm excited about the things we've been learning during this pandemic, about, as we've all referenced, the different forms of technology that I think will now contribute to our art form. You can look back historically over the course of the evolution of theater and see how, powerful forces of society have transitioned and changed theater. This time is no exception. And I'm really excited about the prospect of what we're learning now and how we don't even know yet how it's going to contribute to the evolution of our art form. But I know it will in profound ways.
The short answer, of course, which a professor never wants to give, is I have no idea what the effect is going to be. But that not stopping me. I look at, for the theater, I think it's a really interesting question, how much the traditional theater audience that has built almost from scratch in America, this whole regional and resident performing arts decentralized environment that has been created since the 1960s in America, how much does that audience crave and how much will it insist upon traditional forms of, dare I say, European-based high art theater? How much will they insist that it remain? And how much will they, the audience, basically say, wow, finally I can sit in my armchair. Finally, I can go to the restroom when I need to. Finally, I can cater my own dinner in my own kitchen and then see theater. That may happen. But I look at the tradition of the symphony, and Lord knows, there's not an outcry that how come we're doing philharmonic music? Why don't we do rock and roll? Why don't we do more rap? Why don't we do hip hop? That's not the debate they're having. They're having, we need to have Black classical composers, and we need to diversify the ways in which we attract audiences. But they are not having that same conversation about, do we want to basically just re-envision what we consider the art form to be? That the theater looks like it's having a conversation with. And the answer to that, do we want to basically adapt basically an art form that has become ossified and is overly white and is overly Eurocentric? Do we want to adapt that? Will the audience insist on maintaining that? Or do we want to basically just say, we are going to be the warehouse of culture. We are going to be I won't say the Amazon, but we're going to be the place where it all comes and then it all gets distributed, and we're not going to choose sides, and we are going to be this wonderful marketplace of expressiveness. That may be in the future too. I just don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
The issue of being 303 at the answers is that everybody says pretty much what you're thinking. Yeah, I think we're going to see theater kind of, yes, going back to its standard platform of like, of course, being on a stage with a live audience, but answering the questions that both Bob and Todd have been bringing up of how are we going to answer many of our wrongs in theater's history and its general whiteness. And I also recognize that all of us here are white individuals. So that may not be the best example of it all. But going back to the accessibility thing, since that's a big focus of a lot of my classes at the moment, I'm really excited for more people to have that chance to see theater in some capacity. And I recognize the difficulties that will bring to some smaller theaters, both from like a monetary stance and other things that I can fail to mention. But having that could be me moment, which is so important. And I know it was important for me, and it will continue to be really impactful of seeing somebody on stage and saying, that could be me. And hopefully that brings a new rise of theatric creativity and talent.
All right. Okay, that is unfortunately all the time we have today. But I just want to thank Bob, Elisabeth, and Todd for joining us and taking time out of their day to talk to us about the new normal of theater. I hope our viewers learned a little something about how theater is coping and even maybe thriving and changing for the better, and maybe feel inspired to try something out. So join us next week. We'll be talking with Professor Carrie Miller and some more special guests. So stay tuned.
Trip Tick Tock.